So you hear all right in that?
Oh, yeah.
You hear just fine? Yeah, and we're, of course, apolitical. We're just all about promoting the arts and a better Brownsville. That's our story. So thank you for coming.
We're apolitical as well.
Yeah, well, you kind of have to be, don't you? But I imagine that even in an institution like the zoo, politics find their way in. I imagine there's always something. I mean, just about having a zoo, some people don't like that.
Well, there are a large number of people out there that think zoos are kind of an anachronism or something in the past, but what they fail to realize is the fact that zoos may be the last best hope for a whole lot of species of animals. And so if they are not in favor of maintaining assurance populations in captivity, they are essentially committing those species to extinction. Because they want to see animals in the wild. My question is, what wild? When you go to Ngorongoro Crater in Africa, all the animals have collars on them, ear tags on them. They're managing those populations. There's very precious little wild left in the world. And the most important mission of a modern zoo, when we started, I thought that the most important mission was to produce these animals for future release back to their natural habitats. But now I realize that's going to take a lot of time because of the politics in the world right now. We're not able to release much anywhere. But the fact is that for children in Detroit, Washington, Seattle, New York, Chicago, Columbus, Ohio, the zoo may be the only opportunity those young children have to experience something living and something natural and to develop an appreciation for the natural world. So zoos, the mission now, I would say the number one mission is education and to try and help people to become better environmental stewards of what's left and perhaps even build on that, because clearly our generation doesn't get it either. I mean, look at the climate, and I'm not going to get into a climate change discussion, but we know we're getting warmer, and we have to deal with that, but it's actually affecting plant populations, animal populations. If the krill starts to die off, that's a big part of the food chain up in the Arctic. So we have to get the young people involved, and the zoo is the best opportunity, and we see that every day.
Well, I wanted to tell you that I lived in Africa for a while, in Nigeria. For a couple of years I was teaching over there. And, a lot of that country is still wild. There's a lot of areas that are unoccupied, you might say. Certainly around Lagos, there's huge populations. But,
Sure.
But there are ways you can get out into what you would call the wild. And it was wonderful to see elephants in the wild. That was something that I thought was just incredible, because they were kind of in their natural habitat, behaving in ways that was inspiring, really. I love seeing that.
Yeah, well, we all do. But again, in order to protect those elephants and those habitats, we have to have a public that cares.
Yes.
And I hate to say it, but we only care about those things we know about. And again, the zoo is kind of the window to the wild for a vast majority of urban America. You go back 50 years ago, even when I first got to the Gladys Porter Zoo, most people here had an agrarian background. They saw calves being born, or they took care of the chickens, maybe even prepared the chicken for dinner.
Yes.
But those times are gone, and the vast majority of America is now urban versus rural.
Yeah, I know a lot of programs up in the Northeast where they take kids to a farm.
Exactly.
For the first time in their life. A lot of them don't even understand where hamburger, comes from. It's just at the store. They don't know anything about, the food chain of that. Now, you mentioned coming to Gladys Porter 50 years ago, whatever. You have been here since the very beginning?
I've been here since the zoo was still in construction in November of 1970. So bulldozers were pushing dirt around, and they were reforming the Resaca to create island exhibits, et cetera, et cetera.
How did they recruit you?
Well, it was kind of an interesting thing. Gladys Sams Porter, who was the president of the Earl C. Sams Foundation at the time, met Dr. Warren Dean Thomas, and I don't know if it was a Humane Society of the United States convention or a hunting convention, because Gladys's late husband, Dean, had been a big game hunter. But as often happens with we humans, when you start to realize your own humanity, you start to have a different approach towards other living things. And they realized early on that a lot of the animals that used to be common were becoming rare. And so when Gladys Porter met Warren Dean Thomas, they came up with a concept of a zoo specifically to put together breeding groups of animals that were in danger of becoming extinct in the wild, or very, very rare at the least. And this was a full 5 years. This would have been 1968. This was a full 5 years before the United States Endangered Species Act was even penned.
Wow.
So that was pretty forward thinking back then. And to say that we've been successful with all our programs, no, we haven't, but we've been successful with the majority of them. And the one thing that having a zoo does is when you're up close and personal with their animals, there's a lot of things you can learn that you can't learn in the wild because you can't follow them 24/7.
That's interesting, yes.
And
like what?
Well, for example, let me give you an example. When you watch a TV program on Discovery Channel or Nat Geo, whatever it happens to be, and you see a wildlife officer dart an elephant or dart a rhino to put a collar on it or check its health or whatever it happens to be, that didn't come from wildlife biologists, that came from zoo veterinarians, because we pioneered the use of all of those drugs with all those different species of animals. So there's another aspect of having a zoo that people don't really realize. For example, the drug of choice to tranquilize a hoofed animal, if you have to do a procedure on it, is called carfentanil, or M99. But just through trial and error and accident, we found out it's very lethal to primates.
Oh.
Humans included.
Wow.
So you have to be very careful with that particular drug if you're going to use it. But the neat thing about carfentanil is once the animal is darted, the downtime's very quick. And if you tranquilize them with another agent, they may flounder around and injure themselves. So it's got a lot of benefits. But most of the things you see game biologists or game rangers doing, that veterinary aspect was pioneered in zoos.
I've often wondered why they didn't use those sort of tranquilizers on human beings who were, unruly and difficult.
Well, you couldn't use carfentanil.
I know, obviously you can't use that.
A couple of veterinarians lost their lives when a syringe blew up in their face, and it's quick.
Oh, no. So what about, can you use those on, say, snakes?
Well, we have different tranquilization agents we'd use with reptiles. We generally gas them down with halothane or something like that.
What animals give you pause at the zoo? You think, oh no, I got to work with this one. This is a little dicey.
No, it's not so much pause. It's just a realization of the athletic capability and physical strength of the animal, and what's worst case scenario going in, so you're prepared. And you talked about the beginning of the zoo. Initially, they brought 5 people from around the country to Brownsville, Texas, each of which had a specialty. Mine happened to be reptiles, to train local people to become zookeepers.
Oh. To train local volunteers or what?
No, local people that were looking for work.
Okay.
And in the early days of the zoo, one of the things that we did right in that early phase was, it was right during the Vietnam, or right after the Vietnam conflict, or it was still going on, and we hired mostly veterans. Because we knew they had a work ethic, and we knew that they were willing to learn, and we probably had the most tenured zoo staff over the past 50 years of any zoo in the country. I can say that unequivocally because we had a lot of people 30, 40, and 45 years.
Why did they stay? Why, you know, as opposed to any other industry, you look at people move on and stuff. What makes them stay?
Well, initially, a lot of those people came for a job, but over time they develop a rapport and a relationship with the animals and the people they work with. And, you know, the comment that was made early about some people don't like zoos, I cannot think of another industry where you will find more dedicated people willing to work for next to nothing because they're doing what they love, caring for animals. And so I would say to those folks, quit your stock brokerage job or whatever and come work at the zoo and then tell me that.
And they'll tell you. Well, they fall in love with the animals, I assume, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't help it.
Yeah.
You can't help it. And so, again...
I once got some pygmy goats from, not from the zoo exactly, but she worked at the zoo and she raised pygmy goats on the side, right? And I bought, 4 or 5, and I had 40 acres out in the country, and so I started raising them, and it was just delightful to have those little guys around. But they were hard to protect, though, because they're coyotes and lots of stuff come after them. It's hard to build I learned it's hard to build a good zoo that protects them from the predators. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, for example, we hand raise all our baby flamingos because a baby flamingo is subject to things like owls, hawks. Night herons, which are common, they'll all take baby flamingos. So we pull the eggs, hatch them in the incubator. When the flamingos are big enough, we put them back out with their parents.
You have a lot of flamingos there, right?
Oh yeah, we've got over 50.
Do they stay in the zoo? They fly outside, or
no? One wing, the feathers are clipped to where they can't
go anywhere.
Get lift to go any distance.
When I was growing up, there was a lady near me who had a bunch of peacocks. She had about a 2-acre yard, and she had peacocks that wandered her property, like 4 or 5. They're beautiful. I don't see that so much anymore. Are peacocks difficult? Are they hard to raise or something?
Well, I think part of the problem, if you're familiar with their shrill call.
Oh, yes.
In urban situations, you may have problem with neighbors that aren't real thrilled with that.
To have them around.
Out in the country, that's a different thing. But as you mentioned with your Cameroon pygmy goats, there's predators out there, and they'll take their toll over time.
Yeah. What has been you've been there 50 years, that's amazing. What's been your most difficult day there that you can crawl, or week or whatever, really tough time? No. There's a lot of difficult days because if you're talking about a zoo, you're looking at a community of 1,600 living organisms. So you have life, death, birth, and everything in between. And the highs are real high and the lows are real low. Specifically, if it's an animal that you've had a long-term relationship with. We lost Susie the orang a couple years ago. She'd been there close to 50 years. Longer than you.
Well, no, she got there about the same time I did.
So you're old friends.
Yeah, and the same way with our late patriarch and matriarch of our gorilla family, Lamaidoc and Katanga. We grew up together. Yeah. And so did all the people that worked with them, and we watched them grow and flourish and have babies and raise babies and all those types of things.
So I'm sure you shed a few tears when they died.
Yeah.
I think about, we get close to dogs, for instance, but they're only with us maybe 10, 12 years, and this 40 years, my goodness.
Yeah, well, we've got 2 or 3 flamingos that were in the original flock we opened the zoo with in 1971.
I had no idea they lived that long.
Several of the larger birds are long-lived.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I guess turtles are the longest living creatures?
Turtles are the longest living vertebrate animals. There was actually a record of a Madagascan radiated tortoise in the court of the Queen of Tonga, given to her by Captain Cook.
Cook?
They authenticated as living 187 years. The animal actually lived 212, but because of the change in the palace household help, they couldn't verify all 212 years.
Whoa.
which says a lot for taking your time, approaching things in a slow, deliberate fashion.
But, yeah, I was thinking also of when I think of animals of our region, that live in the wild, and the ocelot is talked about by lots of people. It always comes up with SpaceX, et cetera. The ocelot is endangered and all that sort of thing. You have ocelots, right, at the zoo?
We just now have one.
You have one.
And it was brought in as part of a research program. Hopefully we're going to inseminate it with semen from a cat that was killed on Highway 100.
Oh.
A local ocelot.
Oh.
So this is a research project that's ongoing and upcoming.
But are they plentiful in the wild around here, or are they endangered?
No, they're very endangered here in South Texas. But the biggest endangerment, realistically, is loss of habitat.
Yeah.
And so basically the stronghold for the ocelot in South Texas is Laguna Atascosa Wildlife Refuge and places like Frankie Torria's ranch, that they have dedicated space for those animals. And now I understand that the East Ranch is also working. But that's the only hope for a lot of these South Texas species, because if you drive from Brownsville to Roma, Texas, it's one linear city.
It is.
And that used to all be farmland or brush country.
Brush country, yes.
When I came to Brownsville in 1970, right here at Price Road, when I turned on Paredes Line Road, going north, or going toward the Arroyo, it was solid brush country.
Yeah.
And I'd see, 5 or 6 rattlesnakes crossing the road every night. That's all gone.
Yeah.
But that was also the habitat for the ocelot, the jaguarundi, coatimundi, all those animals that historically were here, because we're at the tip of the tropics, so to speak. And anytime you have an edge effect where you have two ecosystems butting up against one another, the number of species is greatly increased. And so we're the northern limit for a lot of tropical species like the ocelot. But the ocelot used to range clear up into central Texas and perhaps even farther east.
Would they make good pets?
No.
No?
No wild animal makes a good pet.
Well, I mean, we have cats are, of course, domesticated over thousands of years.
Yeah, but they're still not tame.
Yeah. But
you don't control your cat. Your cat controls you.
Oh, that's true. That's the damn truth right there. Yeah, what is the old saying? A cat allows you to live with them.
That's exactly correct.
Well, I was thinking about really these videos that will show people who raised tigers, let's say, or lions, whatever, and they raised them till they were a couple of years old, and then they released them in the wild, and then they go see them in the wild, and those animals love them. They just come and smother them with kisses, with great memories of them. Is that exaggerated in some way, or is that true that they have these phenomenal memories?
Okay, well, let's say you got a baby lion, tiger, leopard, before it opens its eyes.
Okay.
And it imprints on you.
All right.
It imprints on you. There is going to be some relationship there long term, but the fact is, you're familiar with what happened with Siegfried and Roy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, those cats couldn't have had better care or more love and attention. But the thing is, you as a person and me as a person, if I get into your personal space and I get too close, you tell me, back off. Or if that tiger that you've raised as a baby on a bottle has an abscessed tooth and you do something you normally would do with that cat, it reacts, and unfortunately they're so powerful and carry such lethal force that your history.
Yeah.
We in the early days of the year, or early days of the zoo, had 13 Siberian tigers born at Gladys Porter Zoo at a time when there were only 50 in the wild.
14?
13.
Oh, 13. Well, still 13.
Yeah, well, it was out of 2 females.
Yeah, but that's huge.
Or 3 females, I'm sorry. But anyway, to make a long story short, they were all bottle raised. And we were sending them to Stuttgart, Germany, because they had expressed an interest in them as part of the Siberian tiger breeding program.
Sure.
But the government red tape tied us up for so long that all of a sudden we had 13 tigers that were adults, and they no longer wanted them. So end of story. A gentleman was opening a drive-through game park in Mexico called Africom Safari.
I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah, and they bought those 13 tigers to have in their tiger encounter, where you'd go through in a bus or a covered vehicle, and you'd actually go in among the tigers.
Have you been there?
Many times. Yeah.
And the guy who started it was killed by
Our tigers.
Your tiger, really?
Those are the. Well, the thing is, they were bottle raised. They were semi-imprinted on humans, but they're still wild animals, and they will react.
Sure.
But this individual, like some of the individuals you see on television with grizzly bears or other big potentially dangerous predators, never factor in that just one split-second moment that can make a difference. But this individual felt that he had such a rapport with the animals that they wouldn't hurt him, and he ended up paying the price.
They have a statue of him there, as I recall, of the founder.
Yeah.
It is a great little park.
Yeah, it's a beautiful park,
nice.
and it was a wonderful project. But again, he made that same mistake of not remembering that they're wild animals.
It's their nature.
Their
nature is going to come out.
Well, it can come out unexpectedly depending on some trigger mechanism.
So it's no doubt that they, I like your example, they love you, but they respond in a normal way, which for you becomes lethal when they are in pain or frustrated or whatever.
Or you touch them in the wrong place
way.
and they don't want touched there, whatever it happens to be.
Do you have that relationship, an imprinting with some of the animals here?
We try not to.
You try not to have it, I see.
We try not to have it because we're trying to produce animals that would be fit for release to the wild.
Okay.
So we try and keep them. In the early days of the zoo, we ended up hand-raising a lot of gorillas because their mother was not a good mother. She just abandoned the babies. So by default, we ended up, raising the babies with human surrogates.
So all mothers are not naturally good mothers?
Gorilla mothers.
Gorilla mothers.
No, it's no different than people. No different than people. Her sisters, or her daughters, we had 4 daughters at the same time, and 3 of them are perfectly good mothers, and this other mother, just won't take care of her babies.
How interesting. So
we try not to have to hand raise animals.
Okay. Was she out chasing men? The thing I wanted to ask, when you have these extra tigers, let's say, and another zoo wants them, do they buy them?
No. In accredited zoos, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, we have what are called species survival plans. And if you have that species in your collection, you have a seat at the table. But it's a table of experts on that species. There's a population geneticist and a population ecologist on that group, and they determine the best pairings to increase the gene pool long term. And by long term, we mean more than 90% diversity over the next 100 years.
In your zoo here, you've completed 50 years, so what's the next 50?
Well, we're getting ready, hopefully in a couple of weeks, to announce a brand new master plan that is going to take us into the future. Again, I've been there so long that I saw the zoo being built, I saw the zoo aging gracefully, but now it is 50 years old, and there's some things that we need to do, both from the standpoint of enhancing some of the habitats for the animals or increasing their sizes, as well as amenities for the public to make our visitors more comfortable. This week, we just completed a shade structure between the rhinos and the chimpanzees, so the people will be able to stand in cool air.
Cool air, good.
Well, there's fans, and it's shade.
Yes.
And that'll drop at 15 degrees.
Yes.
And within the past month, we've put in 2 shade structures, and we're building a third, as well as another artificial water misting tree on the main walkway. We've planted maybe 15 new crepe myrtle trees down the center of the zoo in the Asian area, so they'll provide both color and shade.
That's good. Well, I tell you, I go there in the fall and early spring. I don't typically go in the summer because it's hot, and late in the evening maybe, but I tend toward the fall and spring.
Well, you need to get over to the zoo in the very near future and see what we've done, because you'll be able to view the animals from the shade.
What happened to the elephants?
Elephants, years ago, our National Association said that we needed to have a much larger area for elephants. Even though we were the second zoo in the world to breed African elephants, and we had 2 babies born at the zoo, they felt that the elephants weren't happy. But again, this is in the eyes of an individual expert in our National Association. And
How did they decide the elephants weren't happy? They ask them?
No. There's a lot. They look at behaviors and look for stereotypic behaviors. But our elephants were perfectly happy when we had a herd of elephants. But case in point, sometimes a field worker will publish his PhD paper, and that becomes law. And a particular mammologist said that elephants need to walk at least 12 miles a day.
Oh.
Savanna elephants only walk because they have to get to more food resource or water. They don't do it recreationally. Forest elephants in West Africa, where you were, they don't go anywhere. Food's all around them. They don't make big migrations. So again, a lot of it's interpretational on what you want it to be.
Yeah, what I remember about my experience with the elephants out there in the wild was that they didn't like us there.
Exactly.
They were throwing dust out of the air, and they were not happy we were around there. It's interesting to watch them.
I've never seen elephants in West Africa, but I've seen a lot of elephants in East Africa, and seen a couple elephant charges on our vehicles. So.
Well, what they said, one thing that struck me when I was there were areas I was in, I would have sworn I was on the King Ranch. It just looked like the King Ranch.
Yeah, and South Texas is perfect habitat, particularly for a lot of the African hoofstock, and that's why so many ranches and tourism operations are located here in Texas and South Texas.
Well, why don't you build a bigger zoo to the north where there's land? Why not, or at least an extension of? Why not do something like that? I know it's money, but but if you had your dream, could you do that?
Well, we could do a satellite facility in the future. That's not out of the question. But again, it's all based on money. You're talking about extremely expensive operations just for the purchase of the land and then to develop it properly.
Yeah, let's go talk to Elon. Let's see what he'll do. Well, no, but seriously, in the 50-year plan or the new master plan, what is in it? What's in that plan?
Well, right now, the master plan is just dealing with existing campus and get us up to where we need to be moving forward in terms of rethinking some of the areas, re-engineering some of the areas, making some spaces smaller or larger, etc. So the current plan is to update the current campus so that it's still one of the top zoos in the country. And then beyond that, if we could get more land in our present location, we'd love to do that because we already have plans and designs of how that could be done.
Yeah, where can we? You seem landlocked. No, okay. All right, we won't talk. Cut that.
It's political.
It's political.
Right now.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Let me see, where was I going for that? Oh, how many school children visit the zoo a year? Do you have any idea of that? Or just a general idea?
Well, let me just say this. Our education department is phenomenal. And on an annual basis, they do formal classes for over 45,000 students. And that doesn't include all the groups that walk through the zoo with their teacher.
And what are the sorts of exhibits that children can enjoy in a hands-on way? I know that you have the petting zoo. What other things can children do?
Well, one of the things that we started doing a few years back, not so many, was feeding giraffes. We're feeding the flamingos. They can feed the Galapagos giant tortoises. And soon again we'll be feeding stingrays. So there's a lot of hands-on things that kids can do, and that's really where it is, because to actually experience an animal is something entirely different. I like to think there's multiple levels of awareness. If I read you something off a piece of paper, that's one level of awareness. If you turn on the telly and you see Discovery Channel, that's another level of awareness. But when you look in the eyes of the gorilla and it looks back and you take a deep breath and you smell gorilla, that's an experience that is totally different, and you can't get anywhere other than your zoo or aquarium.
Yeah.
And the fact is, you develop an appreciation for the living thing. And
it's hard to look at gorillas and not see humanity there.
Any of the great apes, be it gorillas, orangutans, chimpanzees, or bonobos, they're all share at least 97% of our DNA.
Well, you've worked with animals all your life, and a question people always bring up when it comes to a discussion of humans and animals is, do animals have rationality? Can they think? Can they figure out problems and things? Do you see that?
Yeah, but it varies with the level of intelligence will vary with the animal or group of animals.
Of course.
Clearly, reptiles aren't as smart as great apes.
Right.
But with animals that have highly evolved social structures, like large carnivores like wolves, African wild dogs, they have a social structure, so very clearly they have very complex behaviors.
And they work together, right? They work together to solve problems.
Yeah. Chimps, orangs, and gorillas, if you gave them each 10 problems, the chimps would get all the problems done, but 9 of them would be wrong. If you gave that same set of problems, 10 problems, to gorillas, they'd only get half of them done, and half of those would be correct.
How interesting.
If you gave the same 10 problems to an orangutan, it would only get 1 problem done, and it'd be 100% correct every time. When we first opened the zoo, we had one of our zookeepers in training leave his keys, a big wad of keys, about 6 feet away from the orang cage, not factoring in how long the orang's arm was. The orang reached out, got that big wad of keys, selected the correct key, and let himself out.
Oh my God. How did you get him back in?
Oh, they weren't mean. They weren't mean.
That's wild.
Yeah, but there's that. That's interesting because all those animals I mentioned, whether it's bonobos, chimpanzees, gorillas, or orangutans, are all tropical rainforest animals. And yet the gorilla is foliaceous, eats primarily plant material. Orangs are highly frugivorous. They like a lot of fruits. Chimpanzees and bonobos are just like we are. And genetically, they're our closest relatives. And they
have like 98% of our DNA, right?
Yes,
Something
exactly,
like
exactly. And they share all of our bad habits. They're promiscuous. They make war. They cannibalize their own species. But in answer to your original question, the more complex the behavioral repertoire of a species is, probably the higher the intelligence level.
Interesting. Well, the one that's blown my mind, little things I've seen, is about crows. The crows are good problem solvers.
Oh, yeah. A lot of the animals will use tools. Yeah, like the chimps will use a stick to get termites out of a termite nest. Lammergeier vulture from the Atlas Mountains will drop tortoises from a high elevation onto a rock, because he can't get through the shell. I mean, animals do a lot of problem solving. But again, I've had a lot of people tell me, or ask me, what's the most intelligent snake? And I'll say, well, I don't think any of them are going to solve any major problems. And they'll say, but the cobras look so intelligent. They rear up and they look at you. And I said, my response to them is, any animal that I can rub a prey animal on their skin and they try and eat themselves is not too smart.
Yeah.
You can feed them their own tail if you rub a mouse on it.
Well, you mentioned a little while ago about rattlesnakes. When I grew up down here, I saw lots of rattlesnakes. Like you were talking about, you see 3 on the road on your way north. And I don't see rattlesnakes hardly, and not at all. I've seen rattlesnake in years in the wild, but I see coral snakes quite a bit.
Well, coral snake doesn't take as much territory. They don't have as big a home range. And most of the animals that you're seeing less and less and less of are being killed on the highways, be it ocelots, javelinas, coyotes, bobcats, you name it, and particularly these highways that have the big concrete barriers in them that run for 2 miles. The animal is supposed to be smart enough to know that a mile down there's a cut through that it can. And I marvel at that, because actually the concrete barriers that have the big cutouts should be cheaper because they don't require as much cement, but it would allow the animals to pass through.
Yeah. Well, some of these crossovers that they made for major highways seem to work fairly well in major crossing areas, but I know it doesn't help for the 3 miles in between.
Yeah, well, again, we're talking about specific stretches of road, but I'm just saying roads in general, the highway mortality or roadkill rate is why you don't see animals like you used to, because something like a rattlesnake, the fact you build a road through its home range, it's still going to go where it historically went, come and go, and so they just don't make it.
Same thing with horny toads, right?
Yep, exactly. But the horned lizard is a totally different scenario.
Yeah.
When I got to Brownsville, downtown Brownsville had horned lizards because there were still some yucca and cactus patches downtown where they managed to exist. That's their habitat, open ground, and they feed on the big red harvester ants. So as soon as somebody buys a lot, they poison all the ants, put in sod, and then there's no more horned lizards because their habitat's gone. And the whole thing about most of these species worldwide, not just here, is loss of habitat. And so again, the zoos, we try and educate young people on trying to do a better job, whether it's protecting what's left or even going back and restoring habitat.
Well, there's kind of a movement among some people to get rid of lawns and leave a more natural habitat, or at least more of a natural habitat, instead of the vast green lawns influenced by really British aristocracy. We got to have lawns, to look important. And so what do you think of that? The natural habitat of yards? Yeah,
well, every little bit helps. And my wife and I both work very hard to work with individuals to try and plant native plants, native trees, food plants for animals. And at the zoo, our education department right now is working very hard on that same thing, because the reason that we have so many birds and different species of birds here in the Rio Grande Valley is because we're on 2 major flyways on their migratory routes. But we're going to eliminate their reason for stopping here if we continue to clear every stick of brush. People seem to think that they can clean the understory and leave trees and they still have habitat. No, they don't, because a lot of things are ground nesting. They feed on those understory plants and berries and et cetera. So any piece of natural habitat we can restore or replace a lawn with natural native plants, it's a big help to the environment.
But a lot of plants here that people think are native are not native. So what's native? What's truly native?
Well, that's subject to conjecture because, mesquite trees supposedly aren't native. They were brought up by the Spaniards with along the cattle trails.
Right.
But how long does something have to be here before it's considered native. And in the early days of the Rio Grande Valley, almost the entire valley was tropical deciduous thorn shrub, and that's ocelot, jaguarundi, jaguar habitat. We had jaguars. The last jaguars were killed in 1948 and 1947, respectively, and one was killed at Highway 100 right here in Brownsville on the old Porter Wentz Ranch. 1947, last Brownsville jaguar.
It was shot?
Yeah, because it's a threat to cattle.
I remember seeing a photograph of a jaguar strung up.
That's it.
Is that it?
That's
Black
it,
and
yeah.
white photo. Now, so what area can I go to that where I'll see what you would call that's natural habitat? That's the way it's been for 200 years.
Pieces of Laguna Atascosa Refuge.
Like that.
Or some of these old ranches that have areas that just haven't
Never been cleared. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming. I know you had a lot of animals to take care of, so I'll let you go, but appreciate very much your coming in and educating us.
Well, I don't know how much I educated, but I enjoy talking about our zoo.
Clearly you do.